Good evening, Bentley alumni, family, and friends. We're joining us this evening, so thank you for joining us. I'm Emily Williams, Director of Alumni and Family Engagement. Before we get started, I do have some light housekeeping. After this session, we'll be sending out an email with a recording of this evening's session and a survey to gather your feedback, as well as a listing of our upcoming virtual events. So feel free to suggest ideas for future virtual programs that you'd like to see. Thank you to those of you who submitted questions in advance. Deanna will address several of the pre-submitted questions on this webinar. If you have a question arise as you're listening, please put it into the Q&A box and it will be considered for response during the question and answer session after Deanna's remarks. If you have a very specific question, we'll let you know how you can reach out to Deanna directly after the session, but definitely if you have a more general question, pop it into the Q&A box as it comes to you. Lastly, if you need technical assistance, please use the chat box to speak with us directly. My colleague Bethany will be responding to your questions as best she can. And now today's featured speaker is Deanna Rose Ahigian, class of 2010. Deanna started Indigo Elixirs in 2009 from her college dorm room at Bentley University. Deanna, which dorm room? Which dorm?
God. Lower campus.
Okay, and has been brewing up botanical body care ever since. She has devoted the past decade to science and art of herbal medicine and is passionate about helping people feel their best through plant-powered apothecary offerings and wellness education. After obtaining a Master's of Science in Chinese medicine, she became a licensed herbalist and acupuncturist in Hawaii, where she's joining us from today, and opened up her virtual clinic practice in the spring of 2020. Deanna spends her work life dreaming up new indigo elixirs formulations, creating custom herbal prescriptions for clients, and sharing her knowledge of herbalism and holistic health. Without further ado, please join me in virtually welcoming Deanna. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me, Emily and Bentley. I really appreciate you all taking the time to be here. And I am just trying to get my screen. Here we go. So this is a topic that I'm really passionate about because I've had my own struggles with digestive health, starting when I was as young as in middle school and through, through my teens and 20s, it was relatively manageable. But by the time I was in my mid to late 20s, I started experiencing a range of health problems that were all, in the end, linked to my digestion. And it took me pretty much a decade of figuring out what to eat and how to eat to get to where I am today. But a lot of what I learned and what I'll be sharing with you comes from my education in traditional Chinese medicine, which really focused on sort of the body as, one natural kind of everything interwoven being, and how we can best nourish our health through these very simple practices and ways of mindful eating and figuring out what we should be eating for our specific body. So I'm going to get the presentation started. Just give me a moment while I share my screen here. Okay. And hopefully you guys can see that. So, okay. So here we are. This is Follow Your Gut, Digestive Wellness for Optimal Health. My name is Deanna Rose Ahigian, and this is a bit more about me. And just as a brief introduction, so our diet and digestion serve as the foundation of our body's resources, and they're intrinsically connected with every physiological process. Finding our optimal diet is really a lifelong journey for the individual, and it evolves over time, and it's unique to ourselves. By paying attention to what and how we eat, we can decrease inflammation, boost immunity, improve energy, and experience better health overall. And after this talk, if you want more personalized assistance, I can offer one-on-one dietary guidance and custom herbal therapies as part of my virtual clinical practice. And I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. And just as a disclaimer, this webinar serves to provide general information, not medical advice. So without further ado, we're going to really quickly go over digestive organs and their function. So this is just to get us all on the same page. So our mouth is actually the first part of our digestive system. This is the only place in the body where mechanical digestion happens. The rest of our digestive system is either using, the stomach acid or enzymes to break down food. And when you think about that, it's like, imagine a piece of broccoli being chopped up with a knife versus it sitting in a bath of, acidic liquid. When you think about that imagery, you can get a better sense of why it's so important to really break down your food in your mouth. But I'm going to talk more about that later. Food travels from the mouth through the esophagus to the stomach, where stomach acid helps break down food preliminarily, and then protects us against bacteria and starts some protein digestion. But most of our digestion or our nutrient absorption happens in the small intestine, where proteins, fats, and carbs are broken down, and we absorb different vitamins and minerals and water from our food. And we also have the liver, which uses minerals and nutrients picked up from the small intestine to produce pretty much every chemical that our body needs. And our liver also helps break down things that we're eating, more complex substances. And it secretes bile, which is stored in the gallbladder to break down fats. And then the pancreas, which is attached to the spleen, the pancreas releases insulin to, deal with the glucose in our blood and get ourselves to absorb it. And then the spleen isn't really technically a digestive organ. We do think of it as a digestive organ in Chinese medicine, but that's where our old blood cells are filtered out, and many of our really crucial immune cells are made. So moving from the small intestine into the large intestine, that's where our stools are formed and water is removed, and then they leave us in the form of bowel movements. So very generally, what should we be eating? We really want to opt for foods that are as closest to their earthen form as possible. So how they are found in nature. And I also like to call this ancestral foods. Basically what our ancestors were eating before the 20th century. And this includes produce, varied fresh fruits and vegetables, whole grains that are in their original format. So in the format that they come from the plant, ideally soaked in an hour to 24 hours, sprouted legumes or soaked, and legumes include beans, also lentils, and nuts and seeds that are either toasted or soaked as well. If you choose to consume meat, poultry, fish, dairy, get as high quality as you can afford. We definitely want antibiotic-free meats, ideally organic. If you can get pasture raised, that's for sure ideal. Fresh herbs, dried spices, and seaweeds, all really important to incorporate. I'll talk later about herbs and spices. And then we do really want to be eating fermented foods. Refrigerators are a modern innovation. We used to be eating a lot of our foods fermented. That was the natural way of preserving food. And when we remove these things from our diet and don't incorporate them, our gut flora is not able to thrive. So it's really important to be eating these natural fermented foods. So what to avoid? You really want to steer clear of highly processed foods. Basically everything in this photo. So anything, they say generally like the outer edges of the grocery store, but anything that's highly processed is not going to be delivering nutrients in their optimal form. Prepared foods, eating out, enjoy in moderation, once a week, a few times a month. You don't want to get in the habit of eating out every single day. And if you're in that habit, it's best to kind of scale it back, little by little. I always recommend for people to, the nutrition facts. I feel like there's so much focus on the nutrition facts, but what's really important on that label is the ingredient list. And if you're reading ingredients on something and you're thinking, I don't know what most of these things are, they're probably not things that you should be consuming. A lot of the additives to refined foods are preservatives to make them last for a couple years on store shelves. Colors and flavors, colors we do not need, they're not good for you. Flavors, even if it says natural flavors, and this is becoming so pervasive in foods. You see so many things, even in the past 5 years, I've noticed so many more foods, even things like peanut butter and ketchup have natural flavors in them, which they never did before. And even though it sounds not that bad, the flavor industry is essentially creating these compounds that can really have anything in them. There's no way of knowing what's in any given natural or artificial flavor because it's proprietary information of the flavor industry. So you could be introducing your body to a range of different chemicals anytime you eat a natural flavor. So I always recommend, if you're going to eat anything that's processed, have it, the least amount of ingredients. That ingredient list should be very short. Don't consume anything that has lots of ingredients that sound like chemicals, and anything with flavors or colors, you definitely want to avoid. And then also in general, being mindful of very sweet, sugary foods, very salty foods, and very greasy foods. All of those are kind of like too much for the body to handle. So in terms of food combining, it's great to keep each meal simple with a small number of ingredients. The less that you put in a given meal, the easier it will be to digest, because every single food that we put on our tongue, our body starts secreting these enzymes to break it down. And when we're eating, say you are having like a smoothie and you're putting 12 different things in it, that's a lot of work for our body to break down all of these different foods. So it's best to keep it simple within a single meal. So have, less foods at one meal and then vary your meals throughout the day. So instead of drinking the same smoothie with 12 ingredients 3 times a day, break it up and have, one meal with 5 of those ingredients and another meal with, the rest. So you want to also, again, going back to the smoothie where you're throwing everything in like spinach and peanut butter and whatever. I'm going to talk more about smoothies later, but you really want to pair foods together that smell and taste good together. This is just getting in touch with our senses and thinking, okay, like, do these foods complement each other? Because if they smell like they complement each other, then that's our body's way of knowing that they pair well together and from a digestive perspective. You absolutely want to infuse your food with dry spices and fresh herbs. This is one of the best things that you can do starting right now to help the digestibility of your meals, is just start cooking with herbs and spices. So they have been used for, as long as human cooking has been around. Herbs and spices have been incorporated into our meals because, not just because they taste good, but because they all stimulate and, you know, assist with our digestion. So they help break food down, they help it move through us, dispel gas, and they all, you know, whatever it is, whether it's basil or thyme, oregano, paprika, chilies, pepper, you know, black pepper, white pepper, peppercorns, all of that, every single herb and spice that you think of or that you see when you go to that like urban or the spice rack in that section of the grocery store, those all are going to help with your digestion. And so what I normally recommend is using some of those as, you know, always having dry herbs on hand, and then also always having 1 or 2 fresh herbs on hand. You can buy a bunch of parsley or cilantro or green onions and start incorporating those. So after you're finished cooking, just put some of that on top. It really brightens it up. It makes it a little bit lighter and easier to digest. And they're all going to be good for you. So this photo that we have here, I want to talk a little bit about when to eat what. This sort of abstract drawing is what the Chinese medicine view of the digestive system is. So the digestive system is thought of as this pot, and it's over a fire, and it produces steam, and the steam, you know, it kind of like moistens the body, and this is where all of our energy comes from. So the character for qi in Chinese medicine, which is the vital energy that runs through us, is actually this, you know, it's meant to be like a pictogram of this pot of rice over a fire. And so this idea that our digestive system is like a burner is really important. And it's especially important when we think about waking up in the morning and how we want to start our day, because once we, you know, after we've been asleep for, you know, however many hours, we're kind of in a little bit of a fasting state. So when you wake up, you really want to activate what we call the middle burner, or your, you know, your abdominal cavity, your digestive organs, by having a warm, simple breakfast. And I'm going to give you an example of that on the next slide, but really you want to think about, you know, oatmeal, or I recommend a lot of different types of porridges, just something that will be easy to digest and is warm, both in the fact that it's cooked and is warm in temperature. You want to avoid cold, raw, heavy, and complex foods first thing in the morning while your body is just waking up. For lunchtime, this is when your digestion is at its peak. So if you want to have the smoothie or the salad, you know, or the acai bowl, it's best to have them at midday. The sun is highest in the sky, it's warmest, your energy is at its most active. This is when it's going to be easiest for you to break these things down. Dinner time, you're starting to slow down. Definitely nice to have warm things again in the evening. And one of the biggest recommendations that I can give is to finish eating at least 3 hours before bedtime. I used to be such a late night snack person. This was so hard for me to do, but this was really, when I was in Chinese medicine school, this was like such a recurring theme. And over time, I was able to get that, you know, cut out that late night snack, finish eating at least a few hours before I go to bed. And my energy the next day was I noticed such a huge change. And that's because if we go to bed and we're still digesting food, our body is spending energy digesting when it should be repairing and restoring and doing all of those crucial functions that it normally does when we're asleep. So definitely finish eating as early as you can to give your body that time at night to really repair. So this is a recipe for congee, and congee is basically a rice porridge, but you can use any grain. This photo here is one that I made that's actually the Armenian version that my grandma makes called harissa. This one has barley and broth in it and some veggies, but this was absolutely transformative for me when my digestion was at its worst. Having a congee porridge every morning completely like overhauled my entire digestive system. So the way that you make this, it's super simple. You can use any grain of choice. I definitely recommend one that you feel like your body really likes. Rice is a great one to start with, or barley. I love both of those. I've also used millet, wheat berry. I've made it out of everything. And then you want 6 to 8 cups water. I usually do about 7. You can add whatever kind of vegetables or spices and herbs you want. I usually like to put fresh herbs on the end, and I'll do some kind of more fibrous or rooty vegetables in the cooking along with spices. And I like cooking it in a crock pot overnight. I just put it in before I go to bed, leave it on high heat the whole night while I'm sleeping. And then, in the morning it's hot and I'm ready to go. You can also do this on the stove for 2 to 3 hours. And you really it's essentially just a grain with a lot of water that's really well cooked. So it's super easy to break down, super easy to digest. And this will last in the fridge. You can make this for a couple, actually go a long way. It'll last probably 4 or 5 days because the grain does expand. And then I just recommended a few of my favorite pairings down here. Barley, pumpkin, cinnamon, and ginger for a more warming one. Rice, shiitake mushrooms, spinach, egg and nori or seaweed. Emmer wheat, carrots, celery, chicken. This is like, you can really do whatever you want with this. There's no wrong way to make a congee. So going back to cold foods and really keeping that digestive fire lit. When I say cold foods, this is definitely a Chinese medicine term, but what I'm referring to is physically cold. So foods that, just come out of the fridge that you haven't heated, or raw uncooked foods. And then also cloying foods, like foods that are thick, syrupy, creamy, oily, dairy. These are all more difficult to digest. And as I mentioned earlier, you really want to eat all of these types of foods midday. If you're struggling with difficult digestion, I would recommend avoiding all of these foods. But I'll give you some more troubleshooting suggestions at the end. Cold foods in general, and again, this is like the category of cold foods mentioned in the first bullet. These are better suited for people who run hot. So these are people who are usually, they feel hot. They're the last person to put on their jacket, generally tend to have an excess of energy, very active. They maybe have a more robust physique. If that's not you, if you're the person who's first to put on a jacket, you find that you have, less energy than you would like, stick with the warm foods. You can also add warming spices to cold foods. Then that really helps their digestibility. So, ginger, cinnamon, cardamom, clove, cayenne, chili, peppercorn, any of those warming spices are great to add in. So if you're going to have a cup of yogurt, for example, it's great to add in just some of those, add some ginger, cinnamon, and just help to heat it up and just let it get those herbs in there to help everything break down more easily. These are some mealtime rituals. So these sound kind of basic, but they're all so important. When you're eating, be present, just eat. This is difficult for me. I like to be, working on something or reading something while I'm eating, but I do notice, especially when my digestion is feeling off, that just focusing all of my body's energy on eating and not doing anything else is so helpful, because when we're, watching something, reading something, our body's spending energy that it should be spending just focusing on our digestion on other things. So be present, and being present also helps us remember to chew our food. Chew your food like your nutrient absorption depends on it, because it does. And I feel like so many of us are in the habit of just swallowing quickly. And I don't know why that's such a thing, but chew your food to a mush in your mouth. Even they say up to like 60 seconds. You can chew your food for a full minute. And the mushier your food gets in your mouth, the easier it's going to break down once it gets into your stomach and intestines, and the more nutrients you'll be able to pull out of it. So pause, spend your time chewing. Every herbalist I've ever studied with has said this: drink liquids before or after you're eating, not while you're eating. It's, it helps if you're drinking liquids, it can kind of sort of dilute what's going on with the food that you're eating. Your body has to then break down the liquids as well. And it's, you want to just focus on the food, like one thing at a time. So enjoy your drinks before or after. I always used to drink while I was eating, but now I don't even think about it anymore after really working on this. If you need to, especially to start, you can just take small sips of ideally warm water before or during while you're eating, if you need to. But I think over time, you'll find that you don't even need that. And then practice good posture while you're eating and while you're digesting. So this means, like, instead of walking around or eating while you're driving, to whatever extent possible, sit down, sit upright, have good posture. You really want all of your abdominal organs to be able to, fully expand. You don't want to be hunched over and then your stomach is crunched. You really want to be sitting upright. And then also while you're digesting too, you want to make sure that give your body a few minutes after you eat. Instead of like finishing eating and then just getting up and doing the next thing, give your body 10, 15, 20 minutes to just kind of sit and absorb all the food that you've been eating. And this will help, reduce acid reflux, and it'll help you really get the most out of your food, because again, your body is spending all of its energy on digesting. So this is just a general tea recipe. I'm actually launching my own digestive harmony tea within the next couple of weeks. And I can mention at the end where to find that, but I love these herbs, all of these herbs for digestion. Fennel and anise are both really great to help move and, break down food, assist in our digestive function. And citrus peel is really great to add. You can just use literally any citrus peel from your kitchen, from your fridge. Orange peels, I honestly just peel the oranges that I'm eating, and then I save the peels and have them in hot water. Those are all great. Cooling, I talked a little bit about warmer people and colder people. Peppermint's definitely good for someone who is, again, like more of a running hot person. Otherwise, I would recommend more warming herbs like ginger, cinnamon. Licorice is kind of neutral. You can add it into for cooling or warming, but and it's a really great harmonizing herb just to kind of bring all the herbs together and make them work well together. There's also cardamom, nutmeg, any of those that you have. Even if you don't have the raw herbs at home, you can always take powders from your spice rack and just mix them with a little hot water, and that is just as good as having dried herbs. So generally, for tea, you want to add a cup of water, hot boiled water, to tablespoon of this tea blend. And when I say 1 to 2 parts, that's flexible, but basically it means either equal parts of each, or you can kind of adjust it and do like twice as much as one based on your preferences. And then these are great to sip after eating and to stimulate and harmonize your digestion. So daily rituals: practice belly breathing exercises, breathe into your stomach. This is, so many people have shallow breathing. I used to have shallow breathing. I had to really work on getting into this mindset of breathing into my entire abdominal cavity, just a few minutes meditation a day, just focusing on where your breath is going can be, can work wonders. You also want to stretch your abdominal muscles daily, like upward facing dog yoga position. I also linked to, I recommended a yoga video at the end on YouTube for some abdominal stretching exercises. And then it's great to massage our abdomen. So, there's so much you can do with acupressure. There's specific points, but basically the acupressure, acupuncture points are all over your stomach and all over your whole abdominal area. So the easiest thing to do is to start at your belly button and just make small circles and work, in the flow of your digestion. So if you're looking downwards, going clockwise along the way that our intestines move. So make small circles and then just spiral outwards. And anywhere that you notice tenderness or, an aching and it feels better with pressure, you're going to want to just spend a few minutes kind of working out those little areas of stagnation, and just spend it, a few minutes doing that whenever you can. And whenever you're feeling your digestion is off, it's a really nice way to just get everything moving. And again, relieving that stagnation. Also keeping your belly warm. This is kind of basic, but you really do want to keep it warm. Think of it like that burner. You want to avoid clothing with waistbands that are really tight. So the founder of my grad school always used to say, if you pull out your waistband and let it go and it makes a noise when it hits your skin, then it's too tight. So you want to really have clothes that allow, especially while you're eating, that are just forgiving and allow your stomach to, fully expand as much as it needs to and not be constricting. So it's really important when we're thinking about how to feel our best when it comes to eating, to check in after our meals. Do you feel, after you finish eating, do you feel nourished? Do you feel energized? Do you feel like the food was light and that it's moving through you well? Do you feel content? Or, does it feel heavy? Does it feel like it's making you bloated? Are you suddenly having stomach pains, or do you feel more tired? If you notice any of these physical or emotional sensations that are negative after a meal, the food that you're eating may not be best serving your body. And it's important to keep in mind that just because a food is healthy, it doesn't mean that it's the right food for your body. This was something that I struggled with for a really long time, because starting from when I was, in college, I had a really healthy diet. I wasn't eating fast food. I wasn't eating out a lot. I was cooking, but I couldn't figure out why the foods that I was eating, how they were healthy, but they were still like, there was something wrong with the picture. There was something wrong with how they were affecting my body. So when we talk about digestive distress, it can really include anything from bloating, abdominal discomfort, to acid reflux, gas, loose stools, constipation, really any discomfort that has to do with our GI tract. And the reality is, it's easy to think that, oh, like, I just ate this smoothie. Sorry, smoothies. I just drank this smoothie and now I'm feeling awful. There must be something wrong with my digestive system. And while there are structural issues that can happen, most of the time we are dealing with these subtle food sensitivities and other lifestyle imbalances, like, not chewing our food well, running around while we're eating. And that's actually what's causing the distress. So when you ignore these symptoms, like even if it's just like mild bloating or whatever it is, if you ignore them for a really long time, that's when inflammation can actually damage our organs and our tissues and affect other systems of the body. So you don't want to ignore your symptoms. You really want to get to the bottom of it. And sometimes if you go to a doctor and they say there's nothing structurally wrong, then what you really need to do is re-examine what and how you're eating. So for my clients that are dealing with digestive distress, and honestly, I shouldn't say digestive distress. I make all of my clients do this because having a wellness journal and keeping track of what you're eating and how you feel is one of the best tools for when you're first starting out and trying to figure out what to eat. I have a link at the end for anyone who's interested. I will send you a template of my weekly wellness journal and how to really specifically fill it out. But it's essentially writing down each day what you're eating and then how you feel. I usually use a 1 to 5, 1 to 5 scale for, based on what's going on with the client. If you have a specific issue, you're ranking that symptom and you're noting any other symptoms. And this is a great tool. I usually recommend the amount of time that you're going to need to do this can range from, like a few weeks to a few months, but it's really about seeing the patterns in your diet. So you're writing down literally everything that you're eating. You're writing down every time you experience a negative symptom. Also keep track of your energy, keep track of your mood, anything that feels relevant to you. If you're a woman, keep track of where your cycle's at and how it's doing. And then you want to assess this data. So this is something that I help do with my clients, but you can absolutely do this on your own. Go through the data that you've collected for yourself. Where are you experiencing negative symptoms? Look back at what you were eating. What was the meal before that? What were 2 meals before that? Make connections to the foods that are, the commonalities between these areas that you're struggling. And I know it can be extremely overwhelming. So that's why I usually say to work through 1 meal at a time. So we start with breakfast first. How can we cultivate a breakfast that feels good for us? And, they do say it's the most important meal of the day. I completely agree with that. I talked earlier about my experience with CONGEE. Start with breakfast, find a breakfast that feels good. The easiest thing to do is to eliminate the most common allergens first. So like strip your diet down from processed wheat, soy, dairy, nuts, raw, spicy, processed, greasy foods. Even if you just do this for a few days or a couple weeks, taking these things out will help you really figure out what is not good for me. Like, for example, I used to think, I had a gluten sensitivity. It wasn't actually all gluten. It's just processed gluten. I can still eat, wheat berries in their whole form. So things like that you're going to need to kind of explore and find out on your own what you need to specifically be eating for yourself. Pare down your meals to be super simple, then slowly start to incorporate more ingredients. So even if you're just starting with breakfast, I would recommend, having just oatmeal, just plain oatmeal with some cinnamon on top. And then, if you do that for a couple of days and that feels good, okay, how can you maybe you'll add a little bit of apple slices, and maybe you'll add some toasted walnuts after that. So really take it 1 meal at a time, pare it down, find something that works, and then move to the next thing. I absolutely recommend getting inspired from traditional meals and recipes. This photo is my cookbook collection. It's small but growing, and I love looking at traditional recipes as a way for me to get inspired. I'm Armenian, but I'm 3rd generation, so a lot has gotten lost in the wash, and I'm sure many of you can relate to that. So I think reconnecting with these foods that our ancestors were eating, even if we're of mixed ethnicities, finding different sources of inspiration from all of our ancestral traditions, I think is super, beneficial and really helpful. I'm just going to do some quick troubleshooting here for really common problems. For people who are experiencing acid reflux, overeating is a huge issue. You really want to eat till you're 80% full. So eat slowly. And then when you feel like you're getting full, pause and avoid, avoid continuing to eat if you feel like you're kind of full. Limit irritating foods like alcohol, spicy foods, dairy. You really want to have good eating posture, what I was talking about, and then definitely avoid lying down or exercising while you're still digesting. For constipation, you definitely want to look at your fiber intake. You want to make sure you're eating foods with lots of fiber. Really good to have lots of brothy soups and liquids to make sure you're getting enough water. So also drinking more water is important. And then having things like hemp and flax, these oily seeds that help moisten the bowels. Those are really great. You want to keep your abdomen, you want to move it, you want to massage it, you want to stretch it. All of those things are going to be important. Having good bathroom posture, get one of those stools so that your knees can be elevated so that you're in a better posture when you're using the bathroom. That can be really helpful. For loose stools, you definitely want, this is chronic, not acute, like food poisoning. This is like a chronic loose stools. You really want to have warm, simple foods. You want to avoid those cold, greasy, sugary, creamy foods, like I had mentioned earlier. Really figure out what those trigger foods are, avoid them, chew your food super well. And then you want to meditate to avoid ruminating. So, ruminating is this concept that comes from the idea of cows chewing. And a lot of our digestion is definitely extremely linked with our minds. People who struggle with IBS, this is a huge issue. Overthinking, over ruminating can really inhibit our digestive function. So have a good meditation or mindfulness practice that helps you keep your thoughts clear and not to overthink and over worry. All super important. And for period cramps, I could spend a whole other hour talking about this, but I always recommend to really dramatically reduce our sugar intake for people experiencing period cramps and also PMS. Honestly, the sugar is such a problem. It makes our blood like syrup and it's harder to move through us. So definitely the week before and during, but I would recommend curbing your sugar intake overall dramatically. You want to keep your abdomen warm. Avoid swimming while you're on your period. Avoid things that are going to make you cold. Eat warm foods, and then make sure you're stretching and exercising every day, honestly, throughout your entire cycle. When you're not feeling your best, and this includes when you start, if you're run down or if you're sick, this applies. You absolutely want to eat well when you're feeling physically not at your best, or mentally or emotionally. This is the time when it's most crucial to eat well, because the more, if we're in a bad place, like if you're just ate a bunch of foods that you shouldn't have, or you were drinking or you're staying up late or whatever it is, and you don't feel great, giving in further and then just treating, it's like, treating myself to a dessert because I feel awful, that just kind of further derails you. So, when you go off course, you really want to just get back on the wagon and really take care of yourself. So when you're feeling not good, again, if you have a cold or you're run down, you want really simple warming foods like brothy soups and vegetables. Ideally, like not even cooked with oil, because the cooked oil can kind of be heavier or harder to digest. So you want to steam, bake your veggies. And then again, avoid the raw, cold, greasy, sugary foods and complex meals with lots of ingredients. And just a few last words, food is in our mouth for moments, seconds, but it's in our bodies for days or weeks, and really even longer than that, because it really does create everything that we need to function. So instead of considering how something will taste, it's great to just pause and consider how a certain food will make you feel after you eat it. So this is really the exercise that we're trying to cultivate with the wellness journal, but eventually you'll find that you don't need the journal. You know, all of my patients eventually graduate from the journal because you have the tools that you need to say, you know, I think that this is not the right food for me. And you'll find that if you literally, you know, put your hand on your gut and think about a food and think about how it will make your body feel, you'll be able to cultivate a conscious connection that will help your mind make a good decision based on what your gut thinks, because it is a very real connection, and checking in with our gut often will help us strengthen the connection and help us make better decisions for our body. So, and just to remember, it's really a journey. Figuring out what and how to eat can be a journey, a lifelong journey. Take it one day at a time. Stay true to the course. And if you fall off track, just get back to where you were going, reconnect. It really is like a conscious decision that you have to make each day and with each meal to, you know, move forward. And of course, treat your journey with kindness and compassion. Afford yourself patience and flexibility. If you're, you know, if you really want a slice of chocolate cake and it's a special occasion, enjoy it. You know, it's all about finding moderation and then feeling good about the moderation that we allow ourselves. You should never feel deprived or, you know, that you're lacking things that you will really want. And of course, ask loved ones for support. You know, it can be a team effort. And if you're sharing a household, it's definitely important that everyone is on track with you on this mission. These are a few additional resources. My blog, I do post content, and I'm going to be posting a lot more this year. I have a blog post on how to eat for optimal health. Healing with Whole Foods is an amazing book by Paul Pitchford that's sort of through the Chinese medicine lens of healing. The Cosmic Kitchen Cookbook is a great resource written by friends, and it's more of an Ayurvedic approach to eating. And then Yoga for Gut Health is a YouTube video by Yoga with Adrienne, and that's just some great abdominal stretching exercises. Thank you so much. For all of you, you can get 15% off my apothecary shop. I have a whole range of body care. You can use the checkout code follow your gut at indigoelixirs.com. I am also releasing, like I said, a digestive harmony tea within the next couple of weeks. And if you do this second point, sign up for slides and resources, you'll get an email when that's available. I'll also send you the webinar slides, and I'll send you the weekly wellness journal template and a couple other links. And for anyone who really wants more personal information, you're welcome to book a free 15-minute call with me. I can give you some recommendations based on what's going on. And, you know, I do offer a clinical practice specifically in Hawaii, but I'm also getting my license in Massachusetts. So for Massachusetts people, that's available to you as well. But anyone is welcome to book a free call, and I can help point you in the right direction. And for that, you can go to indigoelixirs.com/schedule. So thank you so much for everyone who's tuning in, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Deanna. And your slides have such awesome photos, so it was fun visual journey as well. We have a lot of questions to get to, so if your question doesn't get answered in the next, 10-ish plus minutes, we, as you know, Deanna has made herself available with those links on the slides. We will send around the link to the recording, and you are welcome to follow up with Deanna directly for the slides specifically to get those resources that she mentioned. So that will all be available to you. Now, on to the questions.
Yes.
Okay, so here's one that's relatively simple. When saving citrus peels, as you mentioned, for like the digestive teas, how are you preserving them, and how long do they keep without spoiling?
So I Honestly, we'll keep some. I'll just keep them in the fridge for a few days, even like 4 or 5 days. I do use a dehydrator, but you don't need to do that. If you just keep them in your fridge, they'll last for a little while. You can also dehydrate them in the oven on like a really like the lowest temperature your oven will go. And you'll just kind of want to check them just till they're dry, and then you can put them in a jar. And as long as there's, if you remove all the fruit, they will last, probably at least a few months if they're completely dry.
Awesome. Okay, let's see. Oh, here's a good one, especially with like Valentine's Day coming up in February. Any recommendations as a hot person who is married to a cold person?
Yeah, that's interesting. So I would say to find a balance, if you can eat the warm thing in the morning for the cold person, and then you can have sort of like at lunch, like for instance, what I like to have at lunch is I'll cook a grain kind of in bulk at the beginning of the week, and then I'll just add some fresh vegetables like cucumber, tomato, things like that, and make sort of like a salad that's sort of sort of warm, but you can have it cold. Like he could just take, or whoever the cold person is, I don't want to assume who it is. The person that runs hot can enjoy more like a cold salad, and the person that runs cold can sort of heat it up. And then even if you run hot, having cold foods all the time is it's not generally recommended. Like Chinese medicine is all about like basically not having any cold foods, but I do feel like there's caveats with that. And so I think just striking a balance and keeping those, keeping the lunch can be more cold or raw, but then keeping the dinners more warm and cooked, I think is a good way to balance.
Excellent, thank you. Now, we didn't mention too much snacks. So what are perhaps your best suggestions for energy snacks, either if you're out on a trail or while you're at home, like many of us are, and getting hungry throughout the day?
Yeah, so I'm not a huge proponent of snacking, but like my partner, he loves to snack all the time. So I really recommend definitely like to have like toasted nuts around. Like I always have walnuts that I just toast in a pan for a couple of minutes and keep those in a jar. Fruit, I definitely recommend fruit, dried fruit. You want to be careful with like dry fruit because it can have a ton of sugar in it, but it's definitely better than eating any kind of like processed sweet thing. So maybe that sounds kind of lame, like fruits and nuts, but I'm really, getting back to, again, like eating foods that are as close to their earthen form as possible. I believe that fully, even when it comes to snacks. Also, like, hummus and veggies, things like that. Like, keep your snacks ideally still simple and still very earth-based, if that makes sense.
That does, thank you. Mentioning sugar, we had a couple of questions about sugar. So when you say reduce sugar, especially when you're talking about, period cramps, do you mean processed sugar or all sugar like in fruit? And what is your take on dark chocolate?
I'm a dark chocolate addict. I love dark chocolate. I try not to have a ton of it. I'll have like a small piece of dark chocolate every day. I think it's fine in moderation, everything in moderation. And when it comes to sugar, I'm absolutely talking about refined sugar. And I'm also talking about, to an extent, fruit. So if you're eating many multiple servings of fruit a day, that's a lot of sugar. And that can be, too much depending on what your body needs. So I would start by first eliminating all of the sugar that is processed to whatever extent you can, especially like for women during that week, during and before the period. But also, like like 2 to 3 pieces of fruit is probably plenty for most people a day. So if you're having like instead of a meal, you're just having a fruit smoothie, then maybe I would say that's something like that you want to consider about potentially scaling back.
Excellent, thank you. This person says, I do very well with whole grains. I eat sprouted wheat and oats in breads and crackers. What are examples of other whole grains that I can try, and where do you suggest I can get them?
Okay, read me the list of what she said she eats already.
Yeah, no problem. Sprouted wheat and oats in breads and crackers, but what are some other examples of whole grains that I can try?
Oh, so other examples of whole grains, and I would, based on the person, I would really look at, again, like, what were your ancestors eating, from whatever area they're from. And that's going to be a really good resource for you to understand, like, what grains and foods in general your body will best digest. But, barley is a great one, millet. I love bulgur. I eat a lot of bulgur. That's like a Mediterranean or Middle Eastern grain. And, quinoa can be good for some people, kind of depends. Rice is great. What I eat white rice. There's also, depending on what you like, brown rice. White rice is easier to digest. So I do recommend white rice for people who have digestive complaints. I feel like there's so many more that I'm not thinking of, but rice, yeah. Probably all the main ones that I said are like the most popular
And easily accessible.
Easily accessible for sure.
Here's a question that we got both live and ahead of time. What do you recommend as far as probiotics or prebiotics, and kind of what is the difference?
So prebiotics basically help you digest food, whereas probiotics are like the strains that break things down. They are not, I would say they're neither. With any supplement or, any additional thing that you can be doing, I think that they can both be beneficial. However, if you're suffering digestive distress, I would say don't start there. Start with your diet and go back to what you think, all the steps that we talked about, figuring out where you can get to a good place from your actual diet and your actual lifestyle, instead of just focusing on the prebiotic and probiotic. There's so many digestive supplements out there, and I really feel strongly about all of that. They're just getting back to our main diet and what we can get from that. I feel like it's totally fine to try both, but again, like, don't expect either of them to solve digestive issues.
Excellent. All right, I'm going to ask you one more question as we are approaching the hour mark here. Again, sorry if I didn't get to your question. Feel free to reach out to Deanna directly. But there was a question about folks who are curious about how meat and alcohol fit into the diet. You did mention meat, but you didn't necessarily mention alcohol. So curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so alcohol, again, it depends on the person. And again, moderation is key. I feel like it kind of depends on how your body metabolizes alcohol. For me, I do not do well with alcohol, so I really don't. I avoid drinking because I notice that it makes me feel awful basically for the next day or couple days. So if you feel like you can tolerate it, it's fine. If you enjoy a glass of wine at dinner and you don't feel like it's negatively affecting you, by all means, enjoy it. People have been drinking alcohol for thousands and thousands of years. And I think just, not practicing responsible drinking, not getting intoxicated, and, enjoying it as much as it feels good for you. And then with meat, yeah, I did talk a little bit about it. I would recommend, eating, it depends on the person, but, to have a couple meat-free meals a day, and then maybe, a couple times a week or at dinner time, however, don't overdo it with the meat either, is basically what I'm trying to say, all in moderation.
Excellent. And I lied. I'm going to ask you one more question because we
Okay.
did get a lot of questions about dairy. So there's a few questions. I'm going to let you kind of pick how you want to respond. So the questions about dairy are, why is dairy an irritating food? And what about dairy products? What do you think about dairy products? Given the health benefits of yogurt, is sugar content a reason not to eat it? You mentioned yogurt is recommended on one of your slides, but does that conflict with dairy? So those are some dairy questions for you.
Okay, so yogurt and dairy, it all is considered like a cold food. So for someone, again, who runs cold, don't start with your day with yogurt. I used to eat yogurt in the morning and I was like, why is my digestion awful? Like the getting rid of the yogurt first thing in the morning was so important. So if you're in a place of digestive distress and you're not someone who like feels like the dairy is really helpful for you, I would absolutely try cutting it out or try greatly limiting it and having it, in the middle of the day if possible, again with those like warming herbs and spices. It's cold, it's what we consider like a damp or cloying food in Chinese medicine. I think people, depending on where you're from, like ethnically speaking, your body may be better suited to digest dairy. But like the dairy that we get in the United States isn't the same dairy that our ancestors were consuming. They were getting the milk from their local farm that was raw and unprocessed, and we're getting milk from like factory farms that are very heavily, it's pasteurized, and then they're fortifying it with other vitamins and minerals and all these things. So it can be okay if you have a lot of digestive distress. It's definitely one of the main irritants. And I think, again, it's because of these, like the modern way that we produce dairy. And in terms of sugar, so absolutely, if you're buying yogurt, look for the ones that have no added sugar. Really, you just want to get that carton that has just milk and the cultures in it. You really do not want to get the ones, all the ones, there's some that are better than others that have the fruit and things, but like so many of them add all these different ingredients that are completely unnecessary. So yeah, definitely look for ones that are very plain and that have no added sugar for sure.
Excellent. Okay, that was it for real. You are great, Deanna. We have loved listening to you, thinking about our gut health and how we can be more mindful going forward into 2021. Hopefully everyone will feel better after today. Please be in touch. Do you have any final parting words?
No, thank you so much. I really appreciate, having the opportunity to talk to everyone about this. I feel like it's so important, and there's so much, that we can all do for our own health, and everyone has their own power over their bodies to an extent. So to really just do whatever you can for your wellness, I think is one of our great life purposes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time and enjoy Hawaii. We'll talk to you again soon. Bye, everyone.